welcome. Threat modeling in 2018. Why do you want to listen to me talk about this? Maybe some of the reason is I've done a lot of things around threat modeling. I wrote a book, I created a game, I shipped some software out of Microsoft to help people do this. And people have been asking me, since I wrote that book, what's new in threat modeling since you did that? And my answer was sort of, not much, not much. And then I started looking at it and I said, well, there's some changes happening. And so I put this talk together as a way to give you my perspective and share with you what I'm seeing as changing in the practice of threat modeling. Also about me, I helped create the CVE, I'm on the review board here. I'm going to mention a lot of products as I go. None of this is intended as criticism, it's just intended to make things concrete. And so with that, when people ask me, what's changing in threat modeling, I ask what's changing in the world. And to me, threat modeling is a way of looking at the world. And so the changes in the world are reflected in the way that we threat model. And so we've seen really interesting news stories just this year. There was a death caused by swatting where someone spoofs a phone number, calls 911 and says there's a crisis at this address. We saw a self-driving car impact and kill a pedestrian. We've seen the rollout of GDPR privacy regulations, which actually have a lot of impact on threat modeling and the economics of it. We get to use phrases like, I got root on the vacuum cleaner. The fellow you see in the bottom middle is President Trump. No, the fellow on the other side of that is Kim Young Choi, who the FBI has publicly said was responsible for the hacking of Sony Pictures. The stuff we do has different consequence. It's bleeding into the world outside of just exploitation. These things matter in different ways. They're used in different ways. And then just a fascinating little story. The Dutch spies broke into IoT video cameras in a Russian military facility, read over the people's shoulders to figure out what computers they were hacking into. Cameras are better than we expect, and we'll talk about that. So when I think about 2018 in a nutshell, it's 2018, we need some cat video. And what you see here is a sophisticated attacker deploying tools against an IoT defensive system.
Oh my God, he did it.
And I'll mention all of the URLs. There's a lot of URLs, there's a lot of references. They're all in the speaker notes, and I'll produce a PDF of that that'll be available later today so you can find the video, you can find the stuff that I'm talking about. So when I talk about threat modeling, I think about 4 questions. I think about what are we working on, what can go wrong, what are we going to do about it, and did we do a good job? And I created this frame when I was simplifying things back in 2006, 2008, and it still works well in 2018, and it's working well enough that I'm actually going to use it as a frame for this talk. We're going to talk about what are we working on, and we're going to talk about what can go wrong. In the what are we working on part of this, I'm also going to talk about how we're working on it, because first, the fast-moving world of cyber. There are new things happening. We need to threat model them. But also the ways in which we're working are changing. Agile has won. We need to threat model agilely. And I've been talking to a lot of people about what models are and why different models work in different situations, and I want to share some of that with you. From there, we'll talk about what can go wrong. We'll talk about Stride, we'll talk about machine learning, and we'll talk about conflicts that happen at a higher level of the stack. With that, let's talk about the fast-moving world of cyber. It's really popular to say that everything is changing so quickly. The world is changing. New stuff is happening every day. I mean, here it's easy to get overwhelmed with the new vulnerabilities, the new exploits, the new techniques, all the cool stuff that brings you to Black Hat. If we take a deep breath, we slow down a little bit, we model, we use models to help us see the shape of the world, to help us organize the information that's coming at us, the rate of change looks slower. The Morris worm, 30 years ago, the Morris worm used stack smashing. Stack smashing, sort of a solved problem if you're using a modern platform. We've got ASLR, we've got DEP, we've got all sorts of defenses that make it really, really challenging to write a buffer overflow the way we did 20, 25 years ago. The Morris worm used passwords. And guess what? We're still seeing passwords and password leaks and password problems every day. But I think the world is changing fast in one area, and that's IoT. There are a lot more sensors and actuators than there were 5 years ago. There's a lot more sensors than there were 10 years ago. And a lot of these things run Linux like it's 1999. It's awesome. You get NOP sleds to land your exploit in again. Well, it's awesome if you're an attacker. If you're defending, not so much. But a lot of these things, they look like cars. They look like door-opening dogs. And the cost is all over the map. You have things like light bulbs, you know, $5, $10 for an internet-connected light bulb. And you have things like jet engines. The airplane you flew here in was probably sending telemetry back to its manufacturer in real time so that they can schedule maintenance so the plane has more useful hours, you have fewer delays. Which also means that your jet engine might be running Linux like it's 1999. The impact of these things are also all over the map. If your internet-connected water sensor is down for a week or a month, it might not matter. You might not have a water leak in that time. It'll be okay, you can fix it. If, on the other hand, you have a problem with a medical device that's implanted in someone's body, well, that's much more impactful, much, much faster. And so we have these wide ranges of things to consider as we threat model, as we look at what can go wrong. We've got a broad spectrum, a much broader spectrum than we did even a few years ago. And we also have new attackers, and I'll talk about those new attackers later in the talk. And so all of this means that the ways to threat model are evolving and changing in response to the pressures that they face. And I want to be really specific about the phrase, the ways to threat model are. Threat modeling is a collection of techniques that we bring to bear. It's not one monolithic thing. It's different ways, different tools that you can use. And so the tooling that I shipped, the previous version of the Microsoft SDL tool, is an IDE. It does everything in one place. And in the last year, we've seen some really interesting new tools. Tudomenic, a British company, has a service. And what you do is you upload a diagram and they give you a spreadsheet of threats. It's discrete tooling that does one thing well. Well, that's a whole different model. And then there's a company, Arius Risk, I'm on their advisory board, disclaimer there, but I'm there because they're doing interesting things about scaling threat models across lots and lots of enterprise applications. They're much smaller threat models, they're much faster, and all of this is the ways that threat models are evolving, and our tooling and ability to engage with those changes is evolving. The approaches, I believe Stride still works well. I'll talk about it more. I think the kill chain approaches are really coming into their own as threat modeling tools, and I'll talk about how to do that. But I want you to think about threat modeling, those 4 questions, as building blocks. What are we working on? We have a set of interchangeable blocks we can use. What can go wrong? We have a set of interchangeable, not quite interchangeable, but we have a set of ways of answering that question that we can use in the right circumstance. And when you think about it, it helps you adjust what you're doing in your threat modeling activity to these changes. You don't need a whole brand new threat modeling approach because of IoT. You need to make some changes. You don't need to have a whole brand new threat modeling approach because your company is now doing everything in an agile way. You need to adjust the building blocks you're using a little bit. And so, brings us to Agile. And frankly, Agile has won, and that's a fine thing. And when I think about threat modeling, people often say, but the way you talk about threat modeling is waterfall-y. Okay, yes, it is a little waterfall-y because it's easier to conceptualize when we model development as a waterfall than when we think about these interlocking agile cycles or fast CI/CD cycles. But the thing that I believe very deeply is that threat modeling is no more inherently waterfall-y or agile than Ruby. You can use Ruby in a waterfall process, you can use Ruby in an agile process. Same thing for threat modeling. And so when you do this, in the waterfall world versus the agile world, the skills, the techniques, the tools that you use are super similar. They can be the same. The scope is very, very different. The deliverables are very, very different. And so you can bring these skills that you've acquired, however you learn to threat model. And when I think about Agile, when I think about these 4 questions, there's a lot on this slide. And the reason there's a lot on this slide is I wanted you to be able to take it in at a glance. So down the left column are the 4 questions. System model, what are we working on? Threats, what can go wrong? Fixes, what are we going to do about it? Quality, test, did we do a good job? And so when I think about threat modeling, something like Windows or a big travel site or a big social networking site, you can take it all and say, wow, this is this big complex thing. And that's the waterfall approach. And you can say, what are we working on in this sprint? In the agile world, you can just say, what are we working on in this sprint? Let's threat model that. Maybe it's complicated. It's something that crosses over a trust boundary in some new way. Maybe it's something very simple. We're building a new recommendation engine, and so it's taking in the same data. It's emitting the same sorts of recommendation structures. That's a very simple threat model. But we scope it down to what we're working on, and I'll talk about security debt in a minute. We find threats the same sort of way. We find the threats using Stride, using Killchain, whatever the techniques are, and our fixes go from we're writing test plans and mitigations to we might have a security acceptance criteria for the release. We might have some controls that go into the backlog. They're too big to fit into that particular release. And so making the shift is a shift of scoping and a shift of deliverables. And a lot of people ask me, but Adam, I'm starting out threat modeling. I need a big system diagram. I need to understand how everything comes together, right? Well, it's hard to get there. It's hard to convince people in an agile world that they should stop and create this big map of everything. I see you agree with me a little bit there. So what you can do is just start with whatever the team is working on. Do some very simple threat modeling around that. Demonstrate some value. And over time, people will say, oh yeah, and this component over here has this problem. Good, you notice that. We'll accumulate that knowledge, we'll put it in the backlog, and over time, the act of creating an all-up system diagram might be the sort of refactoring or big complex work that gets its own sprint. But we actually have an advantage. It's an important advantage, which is 2018 involved GDPR coming along. And GDPR said you need to know where your data is going for European privacy regulators. Someone else did all the work to find out where all your data flows are. You should become their new best friend because they've moved from being a project office, get ready for GDPR, to a program office that has to go and bug the developers every quarter to say, what new data flows have you added? Well, maybe you and the GDPR folks can team up and keep those diagrams that they created up to date. You can use them for broader analysis of what can go wrong, and you can develop deeper threat modeling. So I want to shift topics a little bit. And Eva Gelb-Perrin of the EFF tweeted something this spring. She said, our model's scary. And I was like, And then a British academic I know was talking to me, and he said, yeah, I've been doing SDL usability studies, and I was rolling this out, and someone said to me, you know, the thing your questionnaire doesn't capture is this modeling thing is just scary. I was like, well, that's interesting. This meme keeps coming along. And the first thing I want to say is we should absolutely respect the concern. I don't want to say, just deal with it. Look, I created a game to help people threat model. I think it should be easier. But some things are a little challenging. And also people model all the time. We use models. You're coming to a conference. You didn't figure out the path from your hotel room to this room in advance. You have a model. I've got a room, there's a convention center, I'll walk between it. You're abstracting away important details that you had to know about. We're good at modeling many things, but in a world where we generate code automatically, it's scary to ask people to do things that will require thought. It's scary to ask them to do things where figuring out what is right and what is wrong is not obvious. And so, yeah, models are scary, and I have a little quiz for you. We've got two models of a car here. There's a model of a Lego car. Who thinks the model of the Lego car is a better model? We've got a few hands. Who thinks the Hot Wheels model is a better model? Got a few hands again. Many of you are not committed. Many of you might think that this is a trap of some form. I don't know why you'd think I would put you in a trap of some form. But the answer is you're all right. The Lego model is more fun to build. You can reuse the parts in interesting ways. And it's lower fidelity, right? The Hot Wheels model is more resilient when a 4-year-old steps on it or throws it across the room. It shows the curves of the car more accurately. And so models are useful depending on what you want to get out of them. There is no best model, and statistician George Box liked to say that all models are wrong and some models are useful, and I find myself quoting him about once a day because this is just really deep truth. All models, the nature of a model is you eliminate details so that you have something that's easier to construct or work with, and therefore it is by definition wrong. We should judge models on usefulness. And one of the places that models are useful, and I'm borrowing here from John Allspaw, who is the CTO at Etsy. He's got a great blog where he talks about the practice of engineering. And he talks about the difference between dialogue and discussion. And a dialogue is when we have a back and forth, like a Platonic dialogue, We together are searching out the truth. And we're learning from one another. And that exploration, that what if, that prototyping precedes the act of making a decision. And a decision is saying we're going to do this, not that. And models play into this, right? A whiteboard model is great for what if. It is great in dialogue. And as an engineering project moves from brainstorming to delivery to production, it goes through phases. And in the beginning, we have a dialogue where we have pictures on a whiteboard, we're talking on Slack and maybe even still email if you're old-fashioned. At some point, someone says, hey, we'll write a specification for this. And the diagram moves. It goes from the whiteboard into Visio or into OmniGraffle or whatever it is you're using. And maybe if this is a spec a lot of people are going to read, it gets put into Photoshop so it gets really pretty. Each of these involves energy. Each of these involves work. And if there's one thing that I get from the Agile people I collaborate with, it's that they love eliminating work from their programs. And so we can ask ourselves, which of this work is important for which pieces of the things that we're working on in which projects? And the answers can be different. That's okay. The ways to threat model are, we can do more than one thing, and we can do the thing that's appropriate for our project. If all we want is a dialogue about a bunch of possibilities, we go to the whiteboard, we have a conversation, we discover that one has more good properties than others, we take a note, we take a picture, we're done. The other thing to say here is it's pretty common for people that I work with to say, hey, could you bring me a diagram before we have a threat model meeting? And you know what you're actually saying? I don't want to have a dialogue with you. I want to sign off on your work. Because by the time they're ready to bring that diagram to you and have it reviewed, they're done making decisions. They want your acceptance of their decisions, not your engagement. And so that question, perfectly innocent and one I've asked 1,000 times, turns out to have real implications for the ways in which we collaborate with the teams around us. So, we have talked about the changing world, Agile, and models. And from here, I want to shift our attention to the question of what can go wrong. And what can go wrong is at the heart of threat modeling. It's the hardest part in many ways to find systematic, structured, comprehensive ways to predict what will break in a system before you've even built it. That's why we do this work. That's what makes it powerful. And that's also what makes it difficult, because predictions are hard, especially about the future. And so I want to talk about Stride. I want to talk about adversarial machine learning. I want to talk about the use of kill chain. And could you kill my mic for 1 second? I need to cough. I don't want to kill everyone's... Sorry about that. I'm hearing the volume here, and you don't need the what can go wrong is not I deafen you. And so I want to talk about operations, and I want to talk about conflict. So Stride. If you're not familiar with Stride, it stands for spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. It is a model of what can go wrong. It's a mnemonic. It is not a good taxonomy. You'll hear it referred to as a classification or categorization. If you use it that way, you're making work for yourself. You found the threat, move to the next problem. But when you're looking across a system, it's a helpful mnemonic, and there's a lot of new things happening that fit into the system well, and so we can think about them. And also, it's 2018, I get to use emoji in my slides. So there's a variant of Stride called Stride Lateral Movement, and everything you need to know is in the emoji. No, actually, I'll talk about it just a little bit and how I feel about it. So, the S in Stride stands for spoofing, and I want to talk about 3 areas of spoofing which are new. The first is phone authentication. There's markets for selfies, which I think is an interesting development, and I want to talk about audio-video spoofing. So first, NIST has deprecated the use of SMS for authentication. If you rely on text messages for authentication, doing something that a national standards body has said is no longer acceptable might create problems for you when lawyers show up. I'm not a lawyer, I don't want to make a prediction, but you should be aware that NIST is saying stop doing that. Phone porting attacks, where I call up and I say, hey, I'd like to move your cell phone from AT&T to T-Mobile or vice versa. Why do I do this? Because all of your Bitcoins are stored in a way that's protected with 2-factor authentication, and so stealing your phone number allows me to steal all of your cryptocurrency. That's the only cryptocurrency thing I'm going to say in this talk. I apologize if you're here for that. And lastly, I see a rise in scammetry, and scammetry is a term for a legitimate company mimicking a scammer, where they do something that is indistinguishable from the behavior of a scammer. Your bank calls you and says, hi, this is your bank, I need your social security number. And you say, how do I know you're not a scammer? And they say, well, look at your caller ID. No, the right answer is let me call you back at the number on the back of my card, and teach people that that's what they should be doing, because that's way safer, except see above about phone porting attacks. So markets for selfies and facial recognition in general. So in April 2016 or so, MasterCard announced pay with a selfie. Woohoo, cool. And in March of 2018, 6GIL, an Israeli cyber intelligence company, announced that they were finding selfies in dark web fulls, the collection of information that you buy to break into someone's bank account. So the other thing up here is this hat. And if you look carefully at this hat, there's my laser, there are little LEDs here, and these are infrared LEDs. And what they are doing is shining bright light on the face of the person wearing the hat so that it fools facial recognition systems into authenticating them as someone else. The attacks on biometrics are getting really interesting. I wish more people from the biometrics world would talk to the threat modeling world. I think that would be a useful thing. So there's also spoofing of audio. There's a whole field called voice cloning. So a set of companies up there that I found poking around at this. And so if you have, like when I call my bank, it's awesome now. I don't have to give them my password because they listen to my voice and they run a biometric in the background to determine if I'm me. I don't know how well that works against voice cloning. I hope they do. And you can think about, who saw the video of Google Duplex, the Google thing that was making a phone call and making an appointment with your for a haircut. So some of you saw this. Really interesting video. And when I add voice cloning into that, so that now you get a call from the CEO saying, hey, Alice, I need you to pay this vendor $50,000, and it sounds just like the CEO. Wow, BC is going to become really interesting. Or you get a call from your significant other and they're like, hey honey, the Netflix isn't working, what's the password? And because passwords have always been with us and always will be, you use the same password for Netflix in your bank, right? That's pretty nervous laughter. So when your sweetie calls you and says, I need the Netflix password, you give it to them because we're used to using biometrics. We're used to using these human factors as ways to authenticate people. Now, there's also the spoofing of video, and this is really scary stuff. It's really disturbing stuff as well, and I recommend girding yourself if you choose to search for it, because a lot of the ways in which it's used are to put people into adult video they didn't participate in. And that's really horrific for the people who are put into those videos. But you can create these new videos using machine learning, and I was able to find a work-safe example which I wanted to share with you here, so you can see how it...
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, I don't know, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else will. Someone like Jordan Peele.
And notice the gestures and the head movements are different.
Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you. And stay woke, bitches.
So, in this particular instance, they used a voice actor rather than a voice cloning service as they put this together. But you can see this becoming commonplace. The technology is available to create these. It's only going to get faster and better. And so when we start to think, you know, I was opening a new bank account for my business, and that part of the process was a short video call in which I displayed my ID. It was sort of cool. I don't think they've seen this video. Sorry, no more Jordan Peele or President Obama. So moving from spoofing to tampering, Roy D'Souza, who's a colleague who I used to work with, is now with an IoT company, and he was encountering an issue where his colleagues would say, but our devices are in people's homes, they're not subject to attack. And he created the term Airbnb attacker as a way to say, these devices are in people's homes that they rent out to other people who they don't know, who stay there for a week at a time. And so that's an interesting way to get people to think about tampering with devices in a new way. There's also this TapLock, which is a Bluetooth fingerprinty IoT lock, which, as it turns out, has an exposed point which you can put a screwdriver into and unlock it. Attacks get better, but it's important to remember the traditional ones. I'm going to skip repudiation for now. Information disclosure. First, location. Some of you may remember in January there was a fitness tracking company, and as it turns out, its fitness tracking tools were being used by special forces all over the world from Western militaries, and you could go to their website and see maps of where these people were running in places where there's officially no military base or presence. And so that was bad, but that was January, and then earlier this month, another equipment company had the same problem. Now, As a fan of threat modeling, I believe very deeply that the best time to fix a problem is before you ship the product. But the second best time to fix a problem is when your competitor is on the front page of the New York Times for a problem that you too have. And you can go to your CEO and say, "There, but for the grace of God, go we." Now, they didn't do these things, and 2 days ago, the Department of Defense announced a ban on the use of GPS-enabled fitness monitors in operational areas. It's a very broad ban, and again, the link is in there. It was surprising to me, but the worst time to fix a problem is after the DoD has banned a large chunk of your customers from using your devices. The best time, just as a reminder, is by threat modeling and finding it before these problems have occurred. So location is fun, but there are lots of sensors, and mobile phones are driving the cost of sensors down and the quality of sensors up in amazing and unintuitive ways. There was an attack a couple of years ago where the accelerometers in Android reveal your password to any app on your phone because as you move just a little bit, the accelerometers are that sensitive. Unexpected. Cameras take pictures that are way better than people expect. And so we see pictures of documents that shouldn't be public because people don't expect the camera to blow up the picture to blow up that way. If the lens is far away, you're safe. Nope, you're not. All of this leads to exciting new information disclosure. And so tracking data flows from those sensors to wherever the data is going becomes more and more important. So, denial of service. Denial of service traditionally was about compute, storage, and bandwidth. It's now also about money. The $500 cloud security screw up, another Black Hat speaker who I like very much, blogged about this and said, someone broke into my AWS account and used it for cryptocurrency mining. $500 later, Amazon had spent the money that he had authorized, and fortunately, Amazon gave him the money back, but that's not guaranteed. Money is now a target for denial of service, and so is battery. People want to be able to set up a wireless security camera, and so there's competition. These things are insane. 2 years on a pair of AA batteries for a Wi-Fi connected camera that's doing JPEG encoding. That's really nice engineering, really. But there are denial of service attacks that are intended to drain the battery, which is annoying when it's your security camera, and it's really, really, really annoying when it's your pacemaker. So, elevation of privilege. Last year or so, there have been a lot of isolation breaks that make it easier to elevate privilege from one domain to another, from one part of a system to another. And we're going to see more of these, but there's also issues in the IoT world. There was a very, again, disturbing article in the New York Times about use of internet-connected devices by former intimate partners who had been kicked out. And it's easy to say, oh, they should just reconfigure the device. I want to tell you a personal story. I was using an email account I don't use very much. I discovered that it BCC'd another email account. And this was on my Mac. I used to be a systems admin person. I know how to debug things. I could not figure out where that BCC was defined in 30 minutes of trying. These systems are complex. There's lots of places in which configuration information is stored. And so we have to think about privileges in new sorts of ways. So in the interests of time, I'm actually going to skip I'm going to say I'm not a fan of lateral movement. I think it's an extension of spoofing. But if it's going to help you, go ahead and use it. I'm going to talk so the kill chain as an alternative to Stride, I see lots of people using various kill chain types to help them think about operational security in new ways. I like it. There's a guy in the Netherlands created a unified model, meta model for the kill chain that allows you to pick and choose between variants and find ones that work for you. There's a new field emerging called adversarial machine learning. And this allows you to bend other people's machine learning to your goals or just to break it. There's a lot of interesting things happening here, but fundamentally I want you to remember that machine learning is code. It's complex code that you don't understand. More code, more bugs. More complexity, more bugs. Less understanding, more bugs. Do you see where this leads? There's a talk tomorrow if you want to see more on adversarial machine learning. And so I'm skimming ahead because I want to talk about conflict. I want to talk about moving above the thinking about just exploits to thinking about conflict. And as an example of this, this is an interstitial that Yelp showed about the Red Hen restaurant. You may remember there was a kerfuffle in the news. They kicked out the White House press secretary. And what Yelp did was they put up this page that says, hey, we don't take a stand on this, but reviews should be about the restaurant, not about the news. Okay, that's fine, that's what they did. And I want you to notice that there are several, the other thing they did is they said we will review all of the new reviews and get rid of a lot of them. I want you to notice that there are two important technical decisions that they made. The first is they put up this page. Someone had to spec the code, someone had to write the code, someone had to write the text there, they internationalized it probably into a lot of different locales. They did engineering work in response to the use of their platform in this social conflict. The other decision they made is to put these things into review rather than just locking the review for some number of days, right? Lock it for something between 10 and 15 days. Don't tell people so they can't put a calendar reminder. Most of them will have forgotten before they come back to write the mean review or the glowing review. You can make technical choices about what to do in these situations. And so we can think about applying the 4-question frame. What are we working on? Some system that has user-generated content, that has social content. What can go wrong? All sorts of conflict. Trolling, death threats. We've all seen these things. What are we going to do about it? Our intuitive fixes don't work as well as we'd like, and did we do a good job? Well, we've got another emoji here. And so a bunch of people have been doing really interesting work on extending threat modeling to conflict. Shireen Mitchell and John Pincus have some attack trees I'll show you in a second. Amanda Lewandowski built a tool called Sculpt that's an explicit analog to Stride so that we can start thinking about these as problems that we can engineer around, or we can engineer in, excuse me. And so we've got an attack tree. This is by John and Shireen. And if we want to harass a person, we can trigger them, we can flood them, we can make them look bad. This looks like the same sort of thing we do with other threats. We can learn to work in this space, in this way. What to do? The obvious fixes fail. Turns out that real name policies make trolls more virulent. Oops. But there are successes. Nextdoor is a social network for as a social network for neighborhoods. They had a problem with people using a lot of racially profiled language that seemed to be racial profiling in their posts. And they said that's bad, they didn't like it, there was a media cycle, there was another media cycle. So what did they do? They did what agile teams do. They ginned up a bunch of things and they did A/B tests. And then they evolved them and they did some more A/B testing. And when they were done, they found that they had reduced racial profiling in their posts by 75%. That's good. Is it great? No, we'd all like to see them do better, but they're using the tools of software engineering to address these problems. So what do? The fixes are less obvious. We really need expertise in human behavior. We need sociologists, we need anthropologists, we need people who, frankly, are better than we as engineers. That's a weird sentence. We as engineers are not very good at the human side of things a lot of times. We need people who focus on that. There are smart people who have useful things to contribute to this conversation along with us. And I believe that we need a catalog of effective design patterns. So to summarize, stride instances are evolving. There's new and interesting variants. Adversarial machine learning is fun, and it's going to get way more fun for the attackers and way less fun for you. And conflict is really looming over us. I really see the conflict end of this being what I'm going to be talking about a lot in the next couple of years. So a few key takeaways for the talk overall. First, the fundamentals of threat modeling remain important and effective. Second, the details of what we're working on, how we're working on them, and the threats, all of these things are changing. Lastly, conflict modeling is going to be big. I'd like to say thank you very much. I also want to mention, since you are here, there is an increasingly active threat modeling community on the OWASP Slack channel. Be great if all of you could join us. If you're interested in this, please do. I am actually approximately out of time, and so rather than taking questions here, I'm just going to say thank you so much for your time and attention, and happy to take questions afterwards.